Hello, everyone, and welcome to 6 Feet Ahead, a podcast for funeral homes. Today's guest is Jordanna Ibe. She is the founder of Urth Ritual. Urth Ritual creates coffins and urns out of mycelium. Welcome to the podcast, Jordanna. I'm very excited to have you here.
Thanks, Oscar. It's a pleasure to be here.
If you don't mind, could you share with us a little bit about what inspired you to start Ritual?
Yes, of course. My background is in architecture, and I was in grad school designing a building where I wanted this building. It was a residential tower, and I wanted all the organic material in this building to be recycled. So I wanted to create a closed loop system within the building to transform all the organic waste into energy, into compost, into all kinds of things just to keep the nutrients within the building. And it occurred to me that there's organic material in the building that we do not use, we do not recycle, we don't even consider it part of nature. And that's, of course, our bodies. And so it made me realize that when we think about death, when we think about what happens to bodies in cities, living in buildings, we don't think of our bodies as part of the natural cycle. And so we push death away. We push death outside of cities. We try to avoid it as much as possible. We're very uncomfortable with it. And when I saw how uncomfortable my colleagues were when I started talking about death and what happens to people when we die and why we don't compost, it's completely ridiculous to talk about it this way. We shouldn't compost bodies. Ultimately, the building that I was designing, I ultimately ended up designing a vertical cemetery, which is a terrible idea. We should not be designing vertical cemeteries. But it was a really interesting prompt because it got myself and my colleagues thinking about the problem of avoiding the topic of death and dying.
Okay.
Oh,
So go ahead.
and so this idea, the problem of death has been brewing in my head, but all the while I was working with mycelium as a potential building material. So it went from using mycelium as a building material for architecture to actually thinking about the material and the poetry of the material and the poetry of the story of the mushroom, the way that mushrooms are essentially the Earth's decomposer. Mycelium is the largest organism on the planet, and its role is to decompose all organic material and take those nutrients and pass them along throughout the ecosystem. And so the project went from thinking about mycelium as a material to use in architecture and construction to a material that we ought to use to to put people in the ground and bury them in the most natural and simple way.
That's
Rather
amazing.
than it came about as an alternative, as a very sort of simple alternative to the wooden casket, where we use resources, we tear down trees, we process the wood, and we return the wood right back into the earth. And it seems like there ought to be a better way. And I think there is. And so that's what we're doing. We're completing that cycle. We're returning death with the story of the mushroom. And we're trying to merge that story to create a more meaningful return to the earth. We're creating the ritual of reuniting with the earth.
Wow, that's wonderful. No, let's talk a little bit about the rituals. You've mentioned ritual a few times, and I'm curious a little bit more about that. Do you feel like what are some of the most unique and meaningful funeral rituals or memorials that could possibly come from using these urns and these caskets?
Yeah, thanks, Oscar. That's a really wonderful question. I think that it's really important that we have rituals, just to say off the bat. I think it's really important that we bring rituals back into the funeral process. I think that when we don't put emphasis on a ritual, we lose something, right? We don't give ourselves the opportunity that we need to grieve or for closure. And so the ritual of returning the body to the earth, I think, is meaningful in many ways. I can share that I come from a Jewish tradition, and in the Jewish tradition, we only do green burials. There is no such thing as a Jewish burial that isn't a natural burial. And we have a lot of really beautiful rituals that come out of that, that I think growing up, I never thought anything of them. And now, whenever I see a Jewish burial, I really understand the wisdom. And I can give an example of one of them. When we bury someone, we invite the community, the family and the community, to actually shovel dirt over to put back the soil on the over the casket. And so what I think this ritual does is it offers us an opportunity to contribute to the biodegradation of the body of the person. It gives us an opportunity to recognize and accept that this person is dead and that we are saying goodbye in a way that is dignified.
Absolutely. Wow. So a little bit, let's talk a little bit about the process that you're going through right now. You mentioned prior to the recording, you told me you guys were prototyping. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. How have you navigated the process of designing and launching biodegradable coffin and an urn?
Yeah, wow. I can say it happens with great difficulty. Being in this space, it's akin to architecture in the sense, or being an artist or an architect, in the sense that you really have to come up with a story, right? You're coming up with something crazy. You enter the crazy bin, and you have to convince other people to join you. And for a while, I really struggled, and I thought I could do it on my own. And the logic of mycelium teaches you that really it's a network. It's a network of collaborators that will help you get stuff done. And so that's what I did. I found collaborators who are really good at what they do and who really know their stuff, and where we really do have a collaborative process where we design it and we problem solve together. And yeah, so we're now producing our prototypes and we're fine tuning. We're solving problems that we anticipate could become problems, or things that we think the market might want, things that would make our product special and really meaningful and really resonate with families out there. But yeah, so we're just in that process. It's a really fun process. It's a very beautiful process, really intentional and thoughtful. And yeah, we're really excited to get it out there.
So let's talk a little bit. And now that you talk about collaboration, right? And obviously, there is a growing demand for this because there's this whole green movement. I think that we are in the funeral business and we are in the death care industry. We are in the middle of a revolution of sorts. Okay. We have cremation is obviously growing. There's people are starting to go from like traditional memorials to actually celebrating the person's life. We are seeing a lot of changes. I'm just curious, like, what are the challenges that you foresee in getting green burial products widely accepted? And how can the funeral industry support that shift towards sustainability?
Yeah. So, according to the NFDA, about 60% of Americans would be interested in green burial or have expressed interest in green burial options. So, that just shows us that if the options were out there and were communicated to families, there is an interest for it. There is a demand for it. So I think that our biggest challenge right now is education. It's awareness. It's first off educating families, educating our communities that what their options are, that this is an option. Green burial is an option. Regenerative burial is an option. And there's work in terms of educating communities, but there's also work in educating funeral directors. There's ultimately are the ones that will interface with the family and will most likely be the sort of the first educator to teaching people what their options are. So I see that as the first step is really, yeah, starting with funeral directors.
Yeah, I would say what we're seeing is funeral directors have to do a better job at educating people. And as they do a better job at doing that and getting the word out, obviously I am partial to seeing that on social media because my whole focus is the digital presence of the funeral home. But the truth is that we need to start shifting. People won't shift the choices, they won't change the choices they make until they understand why they should make those choices. So when you have people who are always who are looking for direct cremation, for example, and I'm not for or against it, I'm just saying there are people out there who are searching for direct cremation without properly understanding. And when I say direct cremation, no memorial service at all, no embalming, nothing. But they don't understand the purpose of all that stuff. They still believe that when you have a memorial service, it really is for the deceased person. And they don't realize that it's for those who are left behind, for those who are grieving, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not for the person who's dead. They
Right.
don't, depending on what you believe, they probably don't know about it. Yeah.
So it's about educating. I think
And I
we
think,
put that out there.
yeah, and I think absolutely it starts with educating, but also I think people want to feel empowered. People want to feel like it's their decision, like whatever the decision is, right? And cremation can be beautiful as well.
Mhm.
There isn't just one way of doing this. It's whatever is meaningful. It's very personal, and it should be. And people not only do they want, but they deserve to be to be considered in that decision-making process. So no matter what, I think that the funeral director needs to, at least, at the very least, share what the options are, to educate on what the options are, and then leave it up to the family to ask questions or to do their own research, but just to put it out there that there are options.
Yeah, I don't know. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm just curious, do you know if there are any studies that have been done on how a how an eco-friendly burial could affect a family, maybe even in the grieving process, if it helps them at all? Has that even been done? Has that even been studied? I'm just curious if you've come across anything like that.
That's a great question. I am going to look into that. I find that very interesting. I know for myself, I like, I think that there's something really important in the concept of time when we think about. So my mother's mother passed away a year ago, just over a year ago. And in a couple weeks, I'm going to go back home and we're going to unveil the memorial stone. And there's a little bit of a ritual around the 1 year anniversary of her death. And there is something that I find comforting in knowing that my grandmother has been dead for a year. I know that after a year of being in the ground, her body is no longer her body. Her body it was a natural burial. And so her body is now fully decomposed and is part of the soil. And I find that very comforting. I find just knowing that she is dead and she is now part of everything. I find very comforting.
This is exactly what I was referring to. That's great because this is what yeah, how does that should make a person feel a certain way.
And I think that, and I should say, that my mother does not understand why I'm doing this. She is not somebody she does. She's very supportive and I love her. She's amazing. But she is not somebody who is just like comfortable chit-chatting about death. And in the process of watching her mother slowly die and until finally her suffering was over, I think my mother has found comfort in talking about this as well, in talking about her mother's death in this sort of natural way. So I think it doesn't just bring me comfort as somebody who's very comfortable talking about death and comfortable talking about the slow decay of my grandmother, a woman who I just so admire and love and respect, but also for anybody who's maybe less comfortable engaging with this topic.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. You have shared with us your religious beliefs, some of your personal experience with your grandmother. Thank you for that. I think that it's helpful in understanding what you're doing and why you're doing it. Do you have any other personal beliefs that help you with this or that help to bring this cause along?
Yeah, I'll just quickly clarify. I will say that I'm Jewish, I grew up Jewish, but I wouldn't say that my beliefs are religious. They're customs. And
Okay.
they're just they're there. I never questioned why we do certain things. We all know that we do them. And so they're not really religious. They're more just, they're customs. But now that I'm interested in this topic, I've come to recognize the incredible wisdom that exists. Like customs are there for a reason. And
Yeah.
we should trust that. But yeah, I will say I'm a spiritual person. I'm also a yoga teacher.
Okay.
And my own personal beliefs. I like to believe that we contain everything, all the information on the planet, we are a part of everything. We have everything inside of us, our cells chemically entwined with everything. And so I like to believe that when we die and our bodies decompose, that information gets transferred through the mycelial networks underground, through the fungi, to everything, all the organisms, all the plants, all the fruits that then grow on the plants, all the birds that then eat the fruits and then poop, and then their poop transfers. So we are part of everything.
Yeah, and this is all part of the cycle of life and the universe.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything that you've learned through yoga that's obviously coming from that perspective, but anything else?
From my understanding, and there is no one way to understand the philosophy and theory of yoga, but in my understanding, the practice of yoga, of meditation, frankly, uh, all spiritual practices that I know of, or that I have come to understand in my own way, teach us how to let go, how to surrender, how to recognize that we are part of a system, and whether you call it God, whether you call it nature, whatever it is, we are part of a cosmic system. And it sounds woo, it sounds a little bit granola, but the whole every spiritual practice is a practice of learning how to die, in my view. It's a practice where we learn to accept our fate, accept our reality, to come to terms with who we are and where we are. And yeah, and ultimately it helps us find ways of being in the world more authentically and how we could live richer, more full, vibrant lives.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And I can totally see how everything that we do, I think when we're dedicating ourselves to something, whether it's a career or business, it's always intimately tied to something that we believe in. So this is almost the personification. Saying that you're going to have a biodegradable coffin or urn is almost the personification of that belief. The whole cycle of life, the belief that everything is connected. There's nothing that could be more evident than that. I'm excited to see how where this goes and how it goes. Like I said earlier, I we are in the middle of a lot of changes. I think that there's sustainability, eco-conscious movements, they're just continually growing. So this is going to be a big part of the future. Can I ask you, so right now you guys are prototyping. What's the next phase after that?
Once we finish prototyping, we'll go into production, and we're looking for partnerships with funeral homes, with death care practitioners of all kinds, death doulas, anybody involved in the funeral industry who's interested in making this transition and helping families understand that this is an option.
That's great. So, if they would like to contact you, what would be the best way to contact you and find out more information?
The best way to contact us is through our website. Go to urthritual.com, URTH ritual.com. And our email is info@urthritual.com. And we'll get back.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, Jordanna, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you. I think this was really insightful, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Thanks, Oscar.